Talk to the Peach Tree by Sipho Sepamla. Let's talk to the swallows visiting us in summer, ask how it is in other countries. Let's talk to the afternoon shadow, ask how the day has been so far. Let's raise our pets to our level, ask them what they don't know of us. Words have lost meaning. Like all notations, they've been misused. Most people will admit a whining woman can overstate her case. Talk to the paralyzing heat in the air, inquire how long the mercilessness will last. Let's pick out items from the rubbish heap, ask how the stench is like down there. Let's talk to the peach tree, find out how it feels to be in the ground. Let's talk to the moon going down, ask if it isn't enough, eyeing what's been going on. Come on, let's talk to the devil himself. It's about time. So just a few word definitions. Number one, notations. Those are symbols or notes. So basically the notes that I have written in on this poem, those would be notations. Number two, we've got whining. So it's usually a high-pitched sound, can be a high-pitched voice. It's complaining, usually gets on your nerves, sounds like somebody nagging. Then number three, we've got overstate, which means to exaggerate. And again, the nagging comes into it. Someone might say, the lady doth protest too much. You're making too much of a defense. So this overstating her case. A whining, nagging woman can sometimes carry on too much and eventually people become deaf to her. Then paralyzing is the inability to move, incapable of movement, inability to think or act normally. Something has been paralyzed, it's been numbed, can't work anymore. Then we've got number 6, which is stench, and that is a strong, unpleasant smell. So a lot less notes on this one. If I had to write everything down, then it would actually be far too much for the page that I've been given. So firstly, let us talk to, and then it gives a number of objects, creatures that are being spoken to. So the let us, that is anaphora. It is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of the lines of a poem. So that is the repetition of a word or a phrase. It's not a refrain. A refrain would be a line that is repeated throughout the poem. So for most of these, they are quite absurd or ridiculous, like I've written there literally. So it would seem silly to talk to a swallow. It would seem silly to talk to a shadow, your pet, the heat from the sun in the air, things in your rubbish bin. That seems silly, but figuratively, there is an accusation behind it. And like I've written on the next page, it gradually becomes more serious because generally if you have a pet and you hold them up and you talk to them, they purr or they meow or they bark or they woof, and you have a laugh and it's cute and all of that. But underlying that in this poem, considering that it is protest poetry, considering that it was written during the apartheid era in South Africa, if you're asking a pet what they don't know about you, it's almost like saying to the oppressors, saying to the government of the time, you don't know us. Okay, you've made all these decisions, you've told us what to do, where to go, where to live, how to act, how to think, but you don't know us. Why don't you talk to us? Why don't you speak to us? Why don't you, instead of jumping to conclusions and making assumptions and stereotyping and discriminating, why don't you actually ask? So again, talking to the swallows who visit us in summer. Swallows are migratory birds. So wherever there is summertime, that is where they will be. And specifically, it says how it is in other countries. So, this idea of global communication. So, asking other people in other countries a number of things. Number one, do you know what's happening here in our country? Number two, what is it like to be in a country where there's democracy and freedom? Um, do the other people know what's going on? Why aren't they doing anything? Are they doing anything? So there's a number of those questions. And considering that there was also heavy censorship at the time, a lot of people who would have been in political exile, people who would have fled the country, their correspondence, their letters and that would have been heavily censored, and all all mail and notes and packages would have been gone through with a very fine-tooth comb, and words and phrases and places and names omitted and blanked out, very similar to what you might see in military series and movies, where you're reading this letter but half of it is blanked out with a black marker. So that sense of censorship, this global communication. Why? Because swallows migrate and they are in other countries. Then secondly, the afternoon shadow. Shadows generally have a connotation with something that is sinister, something that is dark. It's also very unsettling because you see the shadow but you can't see the thing that's casting it. How has the day been so far? That's quite an innocent question, but the day is referring to the times, the era, the period of time. Raise our pets to our level. I've explained that. Pets get to see us on our good and our bad days. They are there. They are living with us. In a sense, they have more to do with us than, considering the context of the poem, than the people in power ever did. Then words have lost meaning like all notations. They've been misused. Most people will admit a whining woman can overstate her case. Those words are indented, which means they don't follow the margin line with the other lines of the poem. They are slightly inward. Okay, it's like they've been pushed inward. And that's a side commentary on the poem. So it's almost like somebody explaining something and then stopping and making a comment about that explanation. Or if somebody's reading a book out loud, they'll stop, make a comment, and then carry on reading. So that's what's happening there. And the idea is mostly in the words have lost meaning, they've been misused. It speaks of warping and twisting. Nothing is as it seems anymore. You say one thing and something else happens. There's an ambiguity, propaganda, things that are taken and twisted, and instead it was something good, but now it's being used for bad. And most people will admit, according to the poet, the writer, the speaker, a whining woman can overstate her case. So there does come a point when, you carry on nagging and talking and talking and talking and talking, eventually people shut you out. They just become deaf to whatever it is that you are saying. And that seems to be the case. There's a sense of frustration there. So during the apartheid era, people would have been talking and petitions and boycotting, but that doesn't seem to be enough. Then it goes back to the poem. Talk to the paralyzing heat in the air. So everywhere where there's a dark green star, that is personification. So expecting a shadow to answer you, expecting the heat waves, the heat shimmer in the air to respond to you, the items in the rubbish heap, that's personification. But the heat is paralyzing. You are unable to move. It's so hot that you can't actually do anything because it's just going to make it worse. And they also use the word mercilessness. How long is this going to last? And this is where it starts to become more angry, more despairing, more despondent. more angry because of the suffering, because of the oppression. How long is this going to carry on for? How long is this going to last? Let's pick out items from the rubbish heap. So the discrimination, so the derogatory terms for the African people and people of color in South Africa during that time. They were seen as objects, as rubbish. You know, you can't sit here, you can't go there, you can't be in this place, you can't ride that bus, that kind of a thing. So it's almost like a sarcasm, you know, we're treated exactly like rubbish. So if you really want to know how we are, then why don't you just ask the rubbish? So that is definitely an image and a sentiment that is coming through there. Then let's talk to the peach tree. So there's almost a sense of longing here because the peach tree is in the ground, it is rooted. It's got a sense of belonging. This is my patch of ground. This is where I am. This is where I belong. And they're asking, what is it like to be in the ground? What is it like to have a place that you can call your own, where you can settle and put down roots? Let's talk to the moon going down, ask if it isn't enough, eyeing what's going on. And if you look at many of the protest poems for, you know, the matric syllabus and curriculum and what you need, there is this idea of nature being aware, nature of looking on, nature seeing what is happening, you know, in the communities, in society, in countries, in the world. And for the most part, one of two things. On the one side, there's this idea of accusation. Why isn't nature doing anything? You know, it's just looking on, it's just observing. And then on the other hand, there's this idea where nature is actually upset at what is happening. Tears of the dawn, you know, crying, weeping, in turmoil, you know, crying out against what is happening. So there's those two aspects, either blaming nature, you see but do nothing, or nature is very aware of what's going on and it's actually upset by it. But if the moon is going down, that means the night is ending. And the minute you hear that, there is the concept of dawn, of daybreak, which means hope, which means there is a new day, which means there is something new, there is anticipation, and that's where the hopefulness comes in. And then eventually at the end of the poem, there is an encouragement, there is a mobilization where the poet says, come on, let us talk to the devil himself. It's about time. So after having gone to all these different creatures and objects, eventually you have to go to the source. You have to go straight to where the problem is coming from. And in the poem, it's the reference to the devil. We're going to go talk to the devil himself. It's about time. We're done. We're finished. We've exhausted all possible avenues. Now we're going to go to the very, very root of the problem. And the devil is obviously representing the oppressors and the apartheid system. And there is this idea of a firm resolution, being resolute, making a decision and going with it. So somebody eventually stood up and said, right, let's end this. So that is what is happening in that last bit over there. And it's about time. So there's the sense of wasting time, that like we've taken our time. This is something that we should have done much earlier. So themes, life under apartheid. You can look at the mercilessness, the paralyzing heat, the words that have lost meaning, that have been misused. There is the desire for change. So we are going to talk, we are going to have a conversation, we're going to negotiate. People looking at everything from different perspectives. So looking globally, looking at the people who live with you, looking at society, looking at the country, and eventually going to the government. And tone, there is a tone of absurdity in talking to objects and creatures that can't answer back. There is a cynical tone. It's almost like we're having this conversation, but nothing's coming from it. There is despair. So the words have lost meaning. When is the mercilessness going to last? Just talk to the rubbish heap. There is a sense of frustration, the whining woman overstating her case. It is conversational because the reader is drawn into the poem with the let us, let us. So we are in on this. And then just by the contextual questions, explain underlying meaning. Why are the swallows a good source of information? Lots of discuss connotations. So again, it's one of these poems where there is something literal happening, but when you read in between the lines according to the context, there's something very, very different going on.